Welcome, everybody, to No Fear. This is the podcast that takes a look at the boundaries of courage and fear. And what we want to do, our objective, is to take a very close look at fear and how instead of running away from it, we want you to face it. We want you to harness that energy and utilize it to actually be the best version of yourself. So today, I am with two of the co-founders of 3777. I'm Pete Pepe. I'm one of the co-founders. And across from me, we have Eero Seppänen. And directly across from me, we have Jeb Corliss. And the three of us create 3777.
And at 3777, we're all about passion and inspiration. But in the end, we're just ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things because we've learned how to harness the energy from fear and turn it into courage. And courage is not the absence of fear. It's taking an action despite of it. And today's episode, we're going to talk about risk-taking. And who would be a better person to interview than a legendary wingsuit pilot, base jumper, our brother, Jeb Corliss. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. This is going to be fun.
I love talking about risk and fear. And
right?
death.
And thank you for, we invited you to a show, but it's at your home. So thank you for inviting our home for us to set up the podcast.
And,
No problem.
and just a little disclaimer. Usually if we're laughing and we're talking about death, we're not making fun of it.
I am.
Or Jeb.
Yeah.
I being the normal
So what
person
Pete
who's
is
not.
saying, we're talking about serious subjects, but we don't take it so seriously. And today is a risk. And I used to be a base jumper. I got injured. You continued to carry the torch of the most dangerous sport for so long. So when I evaluated my own risk, I had to make an equation that it was how much it cost and plus how likely I would get hurt and injured versus how much fun it is and would I potentially get paid. And then I start figuring out whether it's something to do or not. So what's your equation for risk like when you're dealing with the most dangerous sports and the activities that you do?
Oh, man. Risk is a very complex topic because it's very different for different people. And different people see things as risky. And understanding what the actual risks are can sometimes be very complicated, especially when dealing with something like base jumping. Base jumping is very, very dangerous. And a lot of people actually try to pretend that it's not as dangerous as it is. So they're actually not actually calculating risk properly. They're pretending it's actually safe, which it's not. And then somehow that convinces them that they can do this. And that's why they do this. And I think that's kind of it's an approach that some people take because that's what they have to do in order to do it. I don't really respect that approach so much. My approach is I understand the risks involved, how dangerous it is. In base jumping's case, because that's really what I have, my forte and what I do, is the base jumping kills people. And you have to understand that. And you have to accept that that is the ultimate risk of what this particular activity is. So in order to do the activity, you have to accept the worst case scenario of what could happen, which is dying, right? And then there's a lot of gray all the way up to being successful, which is you can get hurt, you can get arrested, it can destroy you financially, it can destroy you psychologically. It's a very it's a difficult thing to explain to people like, okay, well, why are you willing to take on a risk that's that serious, that's that severe, that can end your life? Like it's pretty much an unjustifiable thing to do something that can kill you. And it's hard to say, okay, well, that's worth the risk. It's worth dying for, so for me, I started base jumping when I was 21. I saw it when I was 16. And for me, the only way I could work through the risk that was involved was to, the reality is I'd suffered from a serious psychological disorder. That's really what it comes down to. So I, at 16 years old, suffered from depression, suffered from a deep sadness, a deep darkness that was consuming and crushing me. So I was going to die. And that's what was coming. I could not survive in this world. I wasn't built for this world. I wasn't meant to survive. I was one of these people who I wasn't going to make it. I was a 16-year-old who was not going to make it. So the only way you can really justify taking a risk that can kill you is if that risk could potentially save you. And I think that that's really kind of how it worked for me. Is I was suffering from a condition that was going to kill me, which was basically my own mind. My own mind didn't want to be here. I didn't want to exist. I didn't want to live. I didn't want to exist. I suffered from I felt like I was living in a very dark place, and I had no light. I had no vision. I had no future. I had no hope. I had no desires. I had nothing. I wanted nothing. And it's really difficult to describe that place and that thought and that being to people who've never experienced it, because it doesn't make sense. And me now as a 48-year-old looking back at that 16-year-old depressed teenager, it's hard for even me now to like connect to him. I don't understand him so much. But what I do know is that when I saw base jumping, the very fact that it could kill me was not a negative. That wasn't something I saw as, oh, that's bad. I saw that as, oh, well, you know, I watched a person base jump and it struck me and I decided I want to do that. And it's perfect for me because if I succeed, then I will have done something that very few human beings in this world would be willing to do because they care about their lives and they want to live. If I die while doing it, then I get released from my suffering on the planet. So for me, either way, I win. So the calculus of risk for me was, the risk was to not do it.
It's almost like base jumping became your life jacket, that you're like a lifesaver in that sense. So it's interesting to see the risk from that perspective.
You guys bring up a good point. I think from I don't want to say normal person, I want to say as a common person that doesn't base jump or that has never been in that extreme sport. I think there's always that misconception, or at least a perception from the general public, of this recklessness where you're endangering yourself. You know, these people are crazy. Base jumpers are always labeled as like lunatics.
Yeah.
And people that are suicidal. And there's all this just misconception, I think. And of course, knowing you guys for such a long time, I have a little bit of insight into that misconception of what the normal audience thinks of it. Because that recklessness always comes up. You hear base jumping, you hear reckless and risk takers. And
I guess the best way to describe it is I don't think it's necessarily a misconception. Because it's hard for me to tell you what other people's motivations are and what other people think or why they do the things they do. I can't tell you why other people base jump. I can only really tell you from my own perspective and me. And there's no question that when I came into it, I came in, and you have to remember, this is a 30-plus year journey that I went through. So in the beginning, reckless would be a great description of me. You know, and suicidal would be a great description of me. A person who wanted destruction and annihilation and the ending of my suffering is a great way to describe what I was. That's what brought me in. And what happened is I was suffering from something psychologically that I needed to cope with. And I didn't know how. I didn't know what to do. So what I did is I used extreme experience as a way of, as like a coping mechanism to deal with a mind that was literally trying to crush me. Like my own mind was trying to destroy me. So in order to do that, I decided to put my mind through such horrendous horror and fear that it kind of like was like shock therapy to myself. Like I always say it, like my mind was on fire. Like I had this raging, burning inferno inside my mind. And what I was doing was whenever I would do a really super dangerous thing, take a really intense risk, I would set a little fire break to kind of try to hold the fire back. So when the fire got there, it would stop. And it worked. And the more intense it got, the more extreme it got, the more risk I took, right? And the more possibility for complete annihilation that I put myself through, those fire breaks got bigger. And it's hard to understand, but this is over time, right? So a 16-year-old child who is suffering from serious depression and isn't going to make it, right? Has no hopes, future, anything. And then all of a sudden finds something that's off in the distance that he has to work for. Like people don't just give you base jumping. Like you don't just get that. You have to work for it. You have to train for it. You have to prepare for it. And in order for people to take you seriously, you can't come off suicidal. You can't come off like a crazy person because no one will come anywhere near you. So you have to start trying to be normal, like trying to think normal and trying to speak normal and trying to and it's fascinating because on the journey, like to base jumping, I actually found happiness and I found purpose and I found my life. And it's a strange thing, but in my search for death, I found my life. And base jumping, actually, it's almost a strange paradox idea, but base jumping saved me. There's no question.
Yeah.
Doing all this really dangerous stuff and taking these extreme risks is what made me find purpose in my life and gave me something, like it gave me a reason to get up off my couch and go out in the world and do something.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting, though, when we're talking about fear and we're talking about courage, the fact that you're an individual that does not use alcohol, does never use drugs, and the fact that most, I think, troubled teens back then or today in this day and age would be strung out on heroin, or they're taking whatever drug they need to numb themselves or whatever it is. And the fact that you were able to take something that's so fearful. I mean, I've been with you guys where I've walked to the edge, or shall I say, crawled to the edge of an 800-foot cliff, and I'm scared to shitless, thinking I'm going to get blown off the edge of it. And you guys are dancing around on the side of it, where you've basically been able to harness your fears and turn that energy into something positive. Yeah. And that to me is extremely powerful.
Well, you know, what's kind of interesting is we also, so I went from being a reckless, chasing my own mortality type person, that by the time I actually got to base jumping, like I actually started really, I'd gone through my skydiving training and I'd gotten enough jumps to actually go through a base jumping course and actually start base jumping, I was no longer suicidal at that stage. So we're talking from 16 to 21, right? 22, I started really base jumping. But by that stage, I was a different person. And then all of a sudden, I started doing risk evaluation. Because now I didn't want to die anymore. Like I actually wanted to live. So it became this, all of a sudden death was no longer an acceptable outcome, right? I did not want to die, right? Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't understand that I could still die. Like things can still go wrong. It's still super dangerous. It didn't get any safer just all of a sudden because my mindset changed. It's still every bit as dangerous. But in order to succeed in something that was so high risk and so dangerous and so, you know, can end your life with one mistake, I had to get really calculated with how I would accept risk, what risks I was willing to accept. And I needed to understand the risks. And that came from the experience of the training. And then I started realizing that through training, you start eliminating variables, right? So there's lots of variables involved in a base jump and lots of things that can go wrong. And that's why it's so dangerous. There's very small margins for error, and any one of those errors can cause massive injuries or death. So that's what you do is you find out what those are and you start slowly eliminating them or learning to control them and training for them.
Well, I just think, again, that's all amazing. I for some reason, I'm still hooked on trying to kind of dig inside your head about the fact that you were able to harness your fear. We know so many people, fearful of walking outside. People have a fear of asking someone out on a date. Whatever that fear or that phobia is, the fact that you went to the extreme, you almost found your greatest fear, which I think is a fear of heights for people, like is something that's so fucking scary. Like put someone at the top of Kuala Lumpur, whatever buildings you guys are jumping off of. Yeah. People would be shitting themselves. Literally, we've seen videos of people grabbing things, like to freaking out. So to take a fear like that and turn it into such a powerful tool, and I think it's something, obviously, like, have you been able to utilize that fear and that tool, which is courage, right? Because you guys both explain to me all the time, there is no courage without fear.
Well, no. Well, it's funny because a lot of people think that courageous people aren't scared of stuff. That's the opposite. I mean, if you're not scared of something, it doesn't take courage to do it. Quite literally, the only way you can have courage is by doing something that you're fearful of, something that frightens you, something that is scary. That's what courage is doing that, like pushing through that. And for me, it's complicated because I was suffering so much psychologically that facing fear, it was almost therapeutic. So I was drawn to it. I was diagnosed earlier in life with a condition called counterphobia, which means that if something frightened me or scared me, I was drawn towards it. And it's a kind of rare condition because people don't usually survive with it. Because it draws you.
Is it a real condition? Like I've been trying to Google it and I haven't found much support.
It's funny. I don't know. All I know is the one time I went to a psychologist, that's what they said. And when they said it to me, my response was, no shit, I've just been telling you for the last hour that's what I do.
Okay, if you listeners, if it's a real condition,
check,
Google
please.
us, leave it in the comments. But Jeff has been telling for years that he has counterphobia. I've been Googling for years, but I haven't seen anything for it. So,
anyways, that's what I was told. But again, is it a true condition? I have no idea.
but it sounds cool. Like, let's see if it is true.
Well, I'll tell you what it is. Whether it's true or not, it describes what I was going through, right? It describes the fact that when things frightened me or scared me, it drew me towards it. So, I did a lot of truly horrific things that genuinely, and this is the odd thing is I have felt fear on levels that are crippling. Like, I've been so terrified. You were there when I jumped the Palace Hotel.
Yeah, your legs were shaking and you had all the physical symptoms of fear, and you still went ahead. That's what I was admiring. Like, I chickened out from that jump. So we had gone to New York on a purpose of like jumping out of a window of a hotel.
And
it sounded like a good idea when we get there. And then I saw like Chep like shivering and going like, like Chep has always been like a few steps ahead of me. And if he shows those symptoms, I know like, oh, this is gonna kill me.
Wait,
like,
so
I mean,
you tapped onto something good. I'm going to ask both of you guys this. This goes back to, so we'll take that as an example for the weighing the risks of something, or measuring the risks, the risk taken, the risk versus reward. Like, there's the perfect example. So, Jeb, how did you gauge it? And then you said, fuck it.
Yeah, well, he's a test dummy. He's like my canary person. So if he starts going like those physical fears, I know, okay, I got to check out on that. And I've done it a few times, which is always like, when you ask about recklessness in the beginning and the risk-taking. So yeah, as a base jumpers, we've been reckless and we've been taking crazy risk in that sense. But like Jeff said, we build ourselves. We kind of started to take baby steps to prepare ourselves. But usually, I'm a big like speaker for risk taking, and I always believe that the entire evolution of humankind have been tied to those people who have been taking those risks and asked the bold questions and taking the first steps. So in that sense, like, people like to box in their head whether it's base jumping, it's a risk taker, all risk taking is back. But I'm such a firm believer that we should take risks because it helps us to grow and it helps us to expand our comfort zone.
Dude, beyond that, we would never have crossed oceans if we didn't have risk takers. We never would have been the people who climbed massive mountains to see what was on their side. We never would have had people put themselves in little metal tubes and shoot themselves into space. I mean, the reality is that the risk takers are the ones who push the human species forward. And a lot of the risks these people take, at the time they're taking them, normal people around them are like, what are you doing? They can't see the vision. And that's the thing, is even with base jumping and the risks that Eero and I were taking, it was very difficult for people who weren't involved to wrap their head around why a person would do something like that. And again, for me, my motivations were, and it's kind of funny because at the time, I didn't fully understand my own psychology. I was kind of acting out of almost unconsciously. Like, I was doing these things without fully grasping why I was doing them. And I didn't start fully understanding the reason or the motivation or the purpose, why I was willing to sacrifice my life for it until recently. I mean, I literally wrote a book about my life. And in the process of writing that book, I had to start looking at my life and looking at the things that I did and trying to understand so I could explain. Like, I'm trying to explain to others, this is why I'm doing this. And in the process of trying to explain it, all of a sudden I started realizing, I'm insane. I mean, that literally the only genuine explanation was I was suffering from a serious psychological disorder that I was trying to cope with. And it's a weird thing because crazy people don't know they're crazy, right? So all of a sudden to realize, oh my God, I'm crazy. Like, it was a very interesting thing to dawn on me. And we're talking about risk. This whole thing is about risk. And I thought that I was being calculated. And I thought that I was, doing the proper training and the proper preparation and that I was, doing this like balancing act of, risk versus reward and, and understanding what the risks were. But there were many instances where I knew that what I was doing was going to kill me. And I still stepped forward.
Wow.
And
you're still here.
Well, I survived. Again, that's a lot of luck. There's a shit ton of luck involved in what we do.
Right. I want to make sure we circle back. First of all, what is the name of your book? I've seen the cover, but just so for people out there that do not know, he wrote a phenomenal book. So I was just like,
Memoirs from the Edge, exploring the line between life and death. And it's funny because it really it's I thought when I started writing the book, I thought, I'm gonna write about my adventures around the world, base jumping and stuff. And then I realized, I've done thousands and thousands of jumps. There's like 5 jumps in this book. It's really not about base jumping at all. And I realized what it was. And another thing is I had, out of thousands of jumps, I've only been hurt like 4 or 5 times.
Wow.
The only ones that matter are the ones where I got hurt. And that's what was so interesting is that in this risk calculus, right, you're always trying not to get hurt. Like that's the goal. You're trying to get in there and get out and not get injured. But as it turns out, my failures, the mistakes that I made ended up being the most important things that happened to me. And I think a lot of people are so terrified of a failure or making a mistake, and they don't realize that those are the things that actually make you learn. Those are the things that make you grow. And for me, I had little injuries. So if I let's say I broke my ankle, I've broken both ankles 4 times each. If I broke my ankle and it was only 6 weeks recovery, I didn't learn shit. It didn't have any impact on me. But if I got injured and it took a year to recover and I was suffering, I couldn't sit in a movie theater and it hurt to sit in a chair and I had to learn to walk again and I had to use a bedpan. I spent months in a hospital. That was different.
It's just the grind, everyday grind that reminds you of that.
It's the suffering. It's the pain and the suffering. And when you're going through the pain and suffering, you grow in a way that I could never have gotten to where I am right now psychologically had I not gone through that suffering and pain. It has nothing to do with the injury. It has nothing to do with even the jumping. It has to do with I went through something that hurt me in a way that literally cracked me in my core. And I think a lot of for myself, I was literally trying to burn myself down, this whole concept of burning myself to the ground so I can rebuild myself into what I wanted. There's this idea of the strongest metal is hammered the hardest. So I just basically hammered the shit out of myself. and I just kept hammering and hammering and hammering until eventually, and again, this episode's about risk and we're talking about risk. And me, a lot of people are like, well, you're the best one to talk about this. Maybe not. Because I had a very unhealthy relationship with risk for most of my life.
Right.
And only now am I really fully grasping that the risks that I was taking were unjustifiable. You cannot justify it at all. There's no justification. But what I can say is in base jumping and in what I was doing, I don't fucking have to justify myself.
Right.
That's the greatest thing about it is it doesn't need to be justified to anyone. And what I do know is that it's what I needed to do to survive. And which is, it sounds strange because what I was doing could quite literally kill me. And the only reason I'm not dead is not because I was some super magical dude. I'm a lucky person. And I have had more near-death experiences than I can count.
Right.
I have seen shit you couldn't believe. It is the blood and the violence and the destruction and the pain and the suffering. It is impossible to explain. Yeah. But I will say this. I needed all of it to get to the place that I am right now. And now as a 48-year-old adult who has a mind that feels clear and clean and just happy. I wake up every morning just content. And so now looking back on the risks that I took, I'm happy that I did. I'm happy that I was capable or found something that I was so passionate about and I loved so much that I was willing to risk everything that I had. And now when I have new people coming up who see what I do and they're like, oh, I really want to get into wingsuit base jumping. How much does it cost? And I'm just like, I'm going to tell you what, it's going to cost you everything.
Yeah.
Everything you have, that's what it's going to cost you. You're going to watch people you love die, and they're going to die in horrific ways, and you're going to see it. You're going to get destroyed. You're going to get broken. It's going to take all your money, all your resources, all your friendships, everything you have is gone. Be prepared.
Yeah.
Because you are probably going to die. And if you're willing to sacrifice all of that and risk everything for that, then you're meant to do this. If you're not, then stay as far away from this as you possibly can. Yeah. I always say if you can find happiness in your life doing anything else, do anything else.
Then base jumping.
Then base jumping. Yeah. Then base jumping. Yeah.
I'm curious to see how many new base jumpers they're going to be after they listen to this.
I think it's interesting when Jeb talks about risk, because in the end, we started to take risk for selfish reasons. We didn't know that we're going to grow in the process. No. Ultimately, we went there to die. And then a side project was that we actually gained courage that allowed us to take other type of risk and move forward in life.
And grow as human beings.
Yeah.
Well, look, I think it's a neat example. Again, you guys might be on the extreme side of the example of it, but to take something that you obviously were into and you were passionate about, or there was something that drew you to it and that you took the risks. And of course, this is to the extreme with base jumping and the wingsuiting, but you took something and you used that risk and you used that fear and you put the courage to it, and it's like forged you guys into who you are.
For sure, and it also gave me I think it also translated in other areas of life. So for me, I've had a few careers in my life. So I've taken with Jeb, we've taken risks with our lives that have very physical consequences. But I've also, having the confidence from taking those type of risks with my life, built the confidence that I could take other type of risks. I was willing to change a career. Like basically, I quit school, joined a circus. That in itself was a risk in my teenage years, and then abandoning the career on the top of my fame was and becoming a professional base jumper was a risk itself, and then the risk that the sports brought along. But doing all those risks and taking them and approaching gave me the confidence that I was finally able to move to LA and to meet and work with you, and then that led to the whole problem of 3777. So I think it's interesting. Like once you move out of your comfort zone and you take risk, and then you don't know where that journey is going to lead you and what it brings along. And for us, it was transforming, like life transforming experience that really changed our personalities and life and everything that we thought about it. And we are lucky to survive. It was not all about the skill, but and I'm kind of, because this episode is about risk taking. So risk manifests in so many different ways in other people's lives. So we were taking recreational risks, but those opened up a whole world that became our living and professional and offered us an incredible life. So I want to talk a little bit about risk. Like how would be as a risk taker, what would you give an instructions for a normal, our listeners about the benefits of taking risk and maybe getting and what you can achieve versus where's the opportunity meets kind of the risk. So how would people be able to build their confidence to be more able to take risk and change their life into positive?
I think the first stage is finding something you're willing to risk for, right? So you have to find something that you're passionate about and actually want to do. Right. And I think that's the trickiest thing for people. It's hard to figure out what it is you actually enjoy. Like, what is it that I would actually like to do with my life? What kind of person do I actually want to be? I actually feel very fortunate that I found base jumping at 16, right? I found it very young. I found what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be. Now, regardless of the reasons, right, the darkness behind why is irrelevant. What was relevant is I found something to become passionate about. And then that passion drug me through my life, right? And then once you have something that you're willing to risk for, right? Because if you don't have something you want to risk for, then why would you risk anything? I sit on my couch and watch television. Why am I going to do anything? I mean, walking out the door is a goddamn risk, right? Getting in a car, driving, everything's risk, right? And if you don't have a reason that forces you to do those things, why would you? So I think the key is finding the thing that you're willing to risk for. Right. And then once you find that thing that you're willing to risk for, right? Once you find that passion, then things really start kind of falling into place. And then risk and fear are, I guess, I kind of see them interchangeably a little bit, right? Because risk involves fear. Like usually when you're taking risks, there's some unknown, and the unknown creates fear, and fear makes it hard to do things. It kind of cripples you in a way. So in order to deal with the fear that goes along with taking the risks is preparation. Training, getting yourself ready. And I always equate it to like working out, like lifting weights. You know everything about lifting weights. That's been your life. So to me, I say, you don't just go do the most scary thing possible. So whatever it is that your passion is, you don't just jump straight in, right? You got to get into it slowly and learn about it. And then, so it's kind of like lifting weights. Let's say your goal in lifting weights is to lift 200 pounds over your head, right? If you just go into a gym and try to lift 200 pounds over your head, you're going to hurt yourself. You're not going to be able to do it, and it's just going to hurt you. Well, risk, fear is similar. You have to take on the small fear first, right? The smaller risk, and where let's just when I was a little kid, I used to love catching snakes, right? So I didn't just start, my goal was catching rattlesnakes, but I didn't start with rattlesnakes. And if I had, I would have gotten bit and probably died. So what I started with were garden snakes, right? So there's fear, there's risk, right? I catch them, but if they bite you, it's not going to kill you.
Yeah.
It might hurt a little bit because they've got little fangs, but it's not going to do damage, right? So you start with the thing that doesn't do damage.
Right.
Then as you get comfortable with that sensation, that feeling of taking that risk, you then move on to the bull snake, which now is a little bit bigger, moves a little bit faster. It acts a little bit more like a rattlesnake. When it bites you, it's a little more painful, right? But still not going to kill you, right? It's still you can handle the mistake. You can handle getting hit by that snake.
Right.
Then once you learn that snake, now you can move up to smaller rattlesnakes, right? And now you're dealing with something that can hurt you. But you don't just jump into that. And you slowly through time learn about the animal, learn how their behavior works, learn how to work with them, learn what triggers them, learn what makes them bite, learn and that's just a process. And as you work, and that process can be used in every aspect of life.
Right.
Let's say you want to invest in the stock market. Same thing. You don't just put all your money in, hey, I'm really into Bitcoin. No, it's insane. You got to learn and slowly do things that are not so risky. I mean, hey, there's some companies out there like Disney does pretty good. You don't have to worry about it going away too quick. So put a little there and then maybe a little bit in Google. And then you slowly start seeing how it works. And over time, you move money around and and sometimes it'll take a few hits, but it's interesting to watch the process of how you grow, how you take risks, and how you learn from taking risk. And you start calculating those.
Right. And that's ultimately any goal in a life is you take baby steps towards them. And what you just described is a perfect way how I approach anything that is challenging in my life. Like you have a goal over there and what are these 10, 15, 20, 100 steps that I need to take to make there. So it doesn't feel overwhelming. And for some of the things that we do that it's not dangerous. So even though it's something that would be deadly normal, but the preparation and groundwork that we've done to things, we can do them safely.
Well, I'll say this about what we've done. The concept of doing something that you know can kill you, right? That decision, when you make a choice, a conscious decision to do something that has literal physical, can damage you. Yeah. That fear is powerful, right? And those risks are extreme. And once you do that, once you make that step and you do those kinds of things, all of a sudden the other fears in life seem to be so much easier. Yeah. That's why I think extreme sports, whether it's big wave surfing, climbing, riding motorcycles, like skydiving, like there's lots of stuff. There's all kinds of things people can do. Even like triathlons, like big, huge, endurance racing out in the, these things, all of us, the reason why humans, I think it's good for them to put themselves through these like difficult, hard, almost suffering type experiences is because it makes all the other things in life so much easier. I had a buddy named Willox who said, once you've jumped off a few dozen buildings, it turns the volume down on the rest of life.
I love that.
And it is. It all of a sudden, asking Sally out for a date doesn't seem so terrifying anymore. What's she going to say? No. It's like, okay, no, fine. Did you die? Yeah. That's the whole concept. If it's not going to kill you, then it makes it so much easier once you've actually chosen to face death. Yeah.
And the fears live in our mind. Like I usually notice the things that I'm most afraid of, if I really want to encounter them and face them, it helps that I write down it on a paper and then I analyze are my fears justified or unjustified? So there's a lot of assumptions that we make when we do something dangerous or something challenging or mainly something new. Right. Anything new that we try, we create these scares and excuses why we shouldn't do them. Mm-hmm. But usually it helps me to evaluate, if I write when I was a kid, I was afraid of everything. I was when it comes to dark, when it goes sand, quicksand, anything you can think of.
And movies made us think quicksand was going to be a much bigger thing when we got older. It's not, exactly. You never see it.
I did see a video of some guy explaining how to get out of quicksand. It was actually very interesting.
When I was 5, I would have really been desperate for that information, but I think I'll be fine for now. But that's the whole thing. Ever since I was a kid, I started to write almost like a bucket list. But rather than writing my dreams, I wrote some of my fears, and then I started to break them down, like you were describing. What are the fears, and then how do I remove those fears or approach them in a slower fashion? So I think the combination of that writing things down, both your dreams and what are you afraid to fulfill those dreams, and then making the step that Jeff was talking. I think that has worked perfectly for me, and it has allowed me to, for being a really scared kid who slept with my parents, between my parents until I was 12 years old, into a person who can jump off like a perfectly good airplane.
Who basically can evaluate risk.
Right.
Yeah.
And take the risk and be willing to take the risk.
Going back to risk, there seemed to be, with the risks you guys were taking with the jumping, and again, knowing that most likely or potentially, and I know you equate a lot of it to luck, but I know there's skill. You guys were extremely skilled. Yeah. But taking those risks seemed to build the resiliency. Mm-hmm. Again, it seemed to like you. Can you guys explain that? Where you would go out, you would say, okay, I'm going to calculate the risks. You were like, fuck it, we're going to do it for whatever reason. You guys decided you were doing it, and you survived it. Mm-hmm. And then it wasn't like, oh, we survived it. Woo, that's it. Okay, I conquered my fear of that jump. You guys did it over and over and over. So again, dig in your heads a little bit. That's something I'd like if you guys could expand on that. It's like, what continued to push you, and what were you gaining from that risk every time? Because it just seemed to build you guys as characters.
Eero said something earlier that's interesting, which is, the fear, and it comes from doing something new, right? Mm-hmm. So when you do something new, the sensation of fear of taking that risk for the first time, your brain hasn't been wired yet. You don't have the programming. We human beings are kind of way our brains work is we're pattern recognizers. So we create patterns, we recognize patterns, and as you keep repeating something, your brain starts understanding the pattern of what you're doing. So the first time you do it, it's always the most terrifying. The first time you take that risk, it's always the most unsettling, where you really get the feeling of butterflies. You feel your throat and your heart in your throat. Wow. You feel like the hair standing on end. You feel terror. It can cause you, like some people, to throw up. It makes you feel nauseous. It hurts you, like physically hurts you. But the second time's not as bad. And then the third time is a little better. And then you start becoming desensitized. And it's funny because you hear the term desensitization as a negative term. But in all honesty, it's a necessity when doing things that are high risk and super dangerous. You must become desensitized to it. That way you can operate when things hit, like basically, base jumping is quite simple when things go right. But when things go wrong, it goes wrong real fast and it gets real hard quick, right?
Right.
And at that moment, you can't have the deer in the headlights moment, or where you just freeze up and don't do anything. Yeah. That desensitization from the training that leads you up to it, right? That is part of how you can, when the thing goes wrong, you operate fast and you respond quickly. That comes from the training. And that's why you hear Marines or military, remember your training whenever they're going into some super scary shit, because the reality is that training then becomes automatic and you don't even have to think about it. Your body just responds to it. So the reason why you keep doing it, especially if you're doing it at a high level. So anytime we were earning a living from this. Like we were doing movies, TV, commercials, and we had to perform, meaning you needed to get it from multiple camera angles, so it needed to be done multiple times the exact same way. And that's where things get tricky. So you actually had to train the response. So the first time was always kind of like just a gimme, just to kind of get over the nerves. And then the second time it would go better, third time better. And then by the fourth or fifth or sixth time, you start feeling more confident and comfortable with it.
Right. But you brought up a good point when you say like desensitization, and we're talking about being desensitized to something, and you're working at such a high level. You guys were operating at the highest level. That's it. Especially in that sport or in the extreme sports world. Yeah. But did you ever get to a point, and I know you both have mentioned this, and again, this goes back to the risk taking, where you're so desensitized from it that you become reckless, and you start to ignore the risk, and that starts to go away.
Yeah, I think there was at least for me, I can't speak for Jeb, but I noticed in myself, like first when you get into it, you're reckless because you don't know it any better, so you don't know what you don't know, and then you become you get more skills. So like when you have like 200 sums, I think that's when I was the scariest version, because I started to build the confidence that I knew something, and I kind of overestimated my skills. And in the sport like base jumping, it was really dangerous and it got me permanently injured. But I think it was a little bit of a roller coaster. So the longer you do something, the more carnage you see, the more friends that you lose, the risk become awfully real. Like it's a theory in beginning only when you enter the sport and people talk about those risks and you might see a video, but then once you're in it and you just just keep living it, and you go to these funerals and hospital visits, and so there's definitely a roller coaster. Some people started from you're not understanding the risk and what you're dealing with, and the deeper you get, more you start understanding and realize like, oh my God, this is fucking so much more riskier and scarier than I ever thought. That was at least my experience.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I have a very similar path, but there were times where I did a jump so many times because I would do them hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I got thousands of jumps. There were just certain jumps that I would just repeat. I'd go back year after year, do again and again and again. And then sometimes you do get to a place where you feel so comfortable that you forget that what you're doing is dangerous. And that has happened to me. Right. Now, again, you got to remember 30-year career, lots of time, and only certain specific instances. But yes, I have had things where I just lost respect for what I was doing, or even more than that, I thought, oh, I got this. Like, this has worked the last 50 times. Right. It's going to work again. And then it doesn't work.
Table Mountain is my bitch. I think that was one of the sentences.
We'll talk about Table Mountain on another day. But let's just say that, yes, I have, look, from your question, I have done jumps where I've gotten complacent, where I've lost the respect for how dangerous it really is, thought that I owned it and it was fine and I could just do this. No problem. I didn't need to think about it anymore. And then it got me. And that's the concept of risk is, once you get to a certain stage, you can now start evaluating risk much better. Like, now you understand, okay, these wind conditions with this particular object, with these particular types of trees and this particular type of landing area can create rotors that I can't see. So you start understanding that, okay, so there's a variable, which is wind, right? Based on how strong that wind is, it creates a risk factor that's too dangerous for jumping. So a lot of base jumping has to do with evaluating weather condition, because weather conditions are a go or no go on a jump. And that's where you start evaluating, is the risk of this jump worth it or not worth it, right? And then there you can also run into jumps where, there's a risk of being arrested. Like you're dealing with the police, you're doing something that's not necessarily legal. And then you start evaluating the risk. Well, is it worth a felony? Is it worth going to jail? Is it worth the amount of money that it could potentially cost me? And then you start realizing, and then, through your jumping, you also get to a stage like kind of where I am now, which is how many times you need to jump off something till you've jumped off something. Got it. How many times do I need to do this until I've done it? I don't need to do this anymore. So that's where I am now at 48 years old. I'm getting to a place where, someone will tell me, oh, we have a new 3,000 foot cliff. And I'm like, I don't give two shits. I've jumped off so many 3,000 foot cliffs. It doesn't matter to me. I don't need to jump off another 3,000 foot cliff.
20 years ago, you would have bought a ticket the next day. And
no, because I hadn't jumped them off yet. So the evaluation of risk, like this concept of it changes. It's not a constant thing. It's constantly moving and constantly adapting and constantly changing based upon you as a human being and based on your journey through your own life. And at some stages, you'll look at something and you'll see the risks that are involved. You'll understand that the consequences are death, and you're willing to take that. It's worth it to you for whatever reason. And then there's another stage of your life where you'll go there and like, not even close. Like there are probably at least 50 jumps that I've done in my life that if you were to come to me right now and say, I'll give you $1 million to do this jump, I would be like, keep your money. I'm good. I don't need that. I don't need that in my life. I don't care. My life is more important. So it's strange because throughout my career, at least in the first 20 years, I made money doing it, but money wasn't the motivation, right? And it's funny because now in my career, money is the motivation because I've done so much of it, that at this point, it's like, I've done it. Now I need to pay my bills. I got a mortgage, that now you'll come to me and you'll be like, and now I'll evaluate the risk differently. It's like, okay, well, what are the chances of breaking an ankle, breaking my leg, dying, whatever it is? How much are they paying? And then when you get on site, you're like, okay, this is a pretty safe jump inside my box of my skill set. And you're like, I can do this repeatedly for safe for what it is, right? And then you get there, and then based upon the weather conditions, what are the winds doing, and then once that, what's the landing area like? What happens if I get a 180? Like, there's a lot of things that you start calculating and you start evaluating these risks. And even on the day, you can say no because you're like, no, it's too dangerous today. Winds aren't good. We have to wait till tomorrow. And then you always have to make sure that they give you that space, that it's like, hey, this is dangerous. You have to give me space based on weather conditions.
Right.
And if the weather isn't good, you need to give me another day or another 2 days or another 3 days. And we've done that. We've had projects where we show up, we're there, it's live, and we're like, we can't jump. The winds are too bad. We have to do it tomorrow. And everyone freaks out and they get all pissed off. They're like, oh my God, you know how much money you're spending? I'm like, I give two shits about how much money you're spending. And it's like this, like, you want to do it. Here you go. Here's the rig. Go do it. You think you think these conditions are so great? You knock yourself out. I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to die, So, but that's the risk evaluation. Right. And this comes from time and understanding and also being in different places in your life, because you grow as a human being, or at least hopefully you do, hopefully you've grown in 10 years, So to me, risk is a really interesting topic because it's not set in stone. Like even what a risk is, it's different based on the different person.
Yeah, if you have big backing, the financial risk don't hurt you as much. Exactly. And risk sometimes we taking willing for risk, and people sometimes put in the position when that's the only choice they have for life. Risk, so there is like you said, risk. It's very subjective.
And that's why it's difficult. Like that when we were starting this conversation, asking the question about risk, it's so almost nebulous. It's because it's so subjective. So, and different people see it differently. And different people have different risk tolerances and different ideas of even what risk is. There are people who will not leave their house because they're afraid of the risk of going outside. So you'll see people right now driving in a car wearing a mask by themselves. And you're like, okay, but they have their risk calculus is that they need to do that. So it's just a fascinating thing that, that's why it's a difficult subject to talk about. Fear is easier. Death is easier. Risk is more subtle. It's a more subtle kind of conversation because it is so different for everybody.
Right. But I think what's cool and what we're trying to get out there for our viewers and for listeners is for people to just, again, this isn't about promoting base jumping or promoting wingsuiting. It's just to look at people that are normal people, just like everybody else. And they're doing extraordinary things.
And they take big risks.
Yeah. And I think, but just to be able to equate and go, that's so cool. Like, your risk taking can be applied to a multitude of things, which is what's really neat. It's not like, when they're base jumping, their risk taking is so different from the guy that's doing the stock market.
And it's different. I have so much being in a base jumping, and I do respect a lot of the jumpers for having the courage of doing them. But I have so much more respect for those people who have taken those risks because they have no other choice. The ones who have asked the bold questions, and so I think there's so much. Yeah, I don't think we really find out what you made out of until you put in the situation and you have to grow and modify.
Well, I got to tell you, I mean, firemen who are going right now, we're having massive fires in California, right? So it's one thing to watch a fireman running into a fire to save a human life or even a cat or a dog or save something. That's a different kind of risk than a dude jumping off of a building for fun. They're two totally different things. Yeah. And I can understand how, the average person can look at the fireman and be like, fuck yeah, or look at a base jumper and be like, what are you wasting your, what a waste of life, and I get it. And so when I get you're online and people troll you all the time and they're like, what, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your life. And it's like, well, I mean, from your perspective, I can understand. And you're entitled to your opinion.
But what's interesting, again, because everybody has their own opinion, but I think what they're missing from it is the fact that you have the capacity to do it. Yeah. And, you know what I mean? And I think that, again, you look at the firemen, and that's heroic.
Yeah,
and that's a duty. They've signed up for that job. They know what that job entails. Yeah. And I also, and we have the highest regard for them, but I also have an extremely high regard for people that take risks that are pushing something and showing what the capability or capacity of a human is able to do. It's like,
I think what's important though to understand with I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for other people, but I can speak for myself is it's actually irrelevant what other people think about me and the risks that I take. The reality is I needed to do what I needed to do to survive. For you. And not just for me, to survive. Yeah. So it's hard for a person who isn't part of your life to understand your motivation for doing what you do. And I'll see base jumpers now, because I'm around them, and they'll say stuff like, oh, he's doing it for the wrong reasons. And I always look at them and I'm like, well, what's the wrong reason?
Yeah.
Why don't you tell me what the right reason is? Because he's obviously doing it for his reason. And whatever his reason is, he's the one taking the risk, not you. Yeah. So if he's willing to take the risk, he obviously has a reason for it. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know what the right or wrong reason is.
Right.
You know, it's a little judgmental to be pushing that on someone else, especially when you're doing the same thing. Right. So I've always found that really interesting, how a person will be doing an activity and then look at another person doing the same activity and then say they're doing it for the wrong reason. And you're like, well, okay. And I now especially see that for myself, because my reasons for doing it when I was, 16 was different than when I was 20, was different than when I was 30, was different than when I was 35, it's different than, and so I've noticed that for myself, my reasons have evolved and changed over time. And Jeb of 25 would kick Jeb of 48 in the balls for being a freaking pussy, and think that I'm a complete idiot for why I'm doing things. Yeah. And I will look at Jeb of 25 and be like, that dude was just unhinged psycho, and it's funny to be able to look at yourself, right, and see that, because once you see it within yourself, the paradox and the complete detachment, it gives you a little empathy for others, and understand that everyone's just trying to figure it out. And you got to give people, anyone who's taking a risk in their life, I give them credit for taking that risk, whatever it is. If your risk is that you're going to have a baby, right, and now you're going to be responsible for another human life, and now you're taking care of that kid, that's a risk. And I respect that risk. It's huge. I haven't taken that risk. So again, I think that it's important to understand that every individual person needs to figure out their own thing that gives their life purpose and meaning and reason. Like, why do you wake up? Why do you eat food? Why do you drink water? Why do you exist? These are the key fundamental things that people need to ask themselves. And then once they find an answer to those fundamental questions, they then have to have the courage to take the risks necessary to do whatever that is. And it's different for everyone.
Yeah,
that's a great thought. I think that's this inspiring, ending and kind of a culminating what we were talking about in this, about courage and about fear and risk taking, and I think this is a great point to thank you for chatting, and thank you, Pete, as well. And then we'll continue.
Awesome. We've all, it's been a while since the three of us have actually physically been next to each other in a room. It's always on a Zoom or FaceTime. So I think there's a great energy when the three of us. It's just a special thing when we're
going to be doing a lot more of these on a lot of different subjects. So it's going to be something we're going to have conversations and talk about things that we find interesting and that connect to what we're trying to do with 3777. I mean, this concept and idea is trying to create almost it's kind of like uppity, call it a philosophy, but it is a way of thinking, a philosophy, an understanding of mortality and what we're all doing here and why. So I think it's
and to learn more about 3777, you can go to our website at 3777.com, which will be doing one of these corners on this video, and then you can see our cool merch, and then you'll see our stories, like we wrote blogs, and then we'll try to tell stories that inspire you and hopefully spark the interest to gain more courage in your life, and we're looking forward to see the effects. So send us comments, and please share our video, and we're going to be posting a lot of these in the future. Thank you for watching.
Awesome. Fun.